Thank you. So for those of you who were here last year, one of the questions we got asked a lot in 2016, 2017 is, why do you serve independent practices when they're going away? And we were always like, well, what are you talking about? They're absolutely not going away. And the reason a lot of people asked that was articles like this, right? Do small physician practices have a future? The decline of private practice, consolidation surges, physicians struggling with just making a living, and then the healthcare law driving doctors away. So last year we dug into this issue for obvious reasons. If it was true, if it was bad for us, it would be bad for you. And we went through and kind of pulled the data together. And I'm not going to go through all of these again. But we came away from our own analysis really just confirming what we knew, that we were really bullish on the future of independent practices. And there were things going on like the consumerization of healthcare that we saw as positive for physicians. The cost effectiveness is significantly more advantageous for smaller practices. Doctors just want to be independent if given the chance. And then on the last one, we fundamentally absolutely believe that software can level the playing field versus the big guys. So if software and services can overcome where independent practices have challenges and allow them to unleash their advantages, they can absolutely beat the big guys. So this was last year. When we look back on this, we think these are all true today, still relevant today. A lot of them have been confirmed over the last year. So with that in mind, this year, I want to talk about you guys. I want to dig into medical billing companies. The way I'll do that is first share some information just on the overall revenue cycle management market, of which we're all part of. And then we did a really interesting survey at the end of June. Hopefully some of you participated. I don't think there's been anything else done like this before, where we did a really thorough review of the whole medical billing industry, and I'll share some of the data with you as part of this as well, and then wrap up with some key conclusions. So I'm going to present some data from Frost & Sullivan, an analyst firm. It's actually hard to get information on our industry. The way that they look at the revenue cycle management industry is they look at hospitals and practices. Obviously, we're, for the most part, addressing practices. And then they break out the market between software and services. Pretty straightforward. And here's their data, and it's pretty remarkable. So today, just with billing software and billing services, it's over a $3 billion market. So it's huge. What's probably more interesting is this is a turning point in 2018. This is the year that services, so the business you're in, actually equals the size of the software market. And if you look at that red line in 2019, 2020, Frost & Sullivan forecasts that services will grow 20% a year over the next couple of years, where software is relatively flat. So we're seeing this rapid expansion of the market, so that next year actually services will be bigger than software. If you look at where the money is actually spent, this is interesting as well. We pulled collections data for physicians and other providers in 1 to 10 provider practices. And the total collections, as best as we could get at it, is actually $220 billion. So if all of those collections went through a billing company, that would be the $14 billion market that Dan presented. So if it's about $1.7 billion today, it just speaks to the huge upside in the market that all of you are going after. There's a couple other interesting things here, maybe some surprising things for you. The third highest category in terms of collections is actually mental health. Rick knows that. He's building his whole business there. But I bet many of the rest of you wouldn't have expected that mental health collections are actually higher than surgeons. And that's because there's 6 times more mental health professionals than surgeons. So it speaks to the interesting opportunities. It's probably a lot harder to make money off of a psychologist than a surgeon, but my guess is it's a different level of competition. So those are some of the insights that are important as you think about your business. The other one I would highlight is physical therapy and occupational therapy. Out of all these segments, it's actually the fastest growing in terms of provider additions. So I know some of you actually focus on that space, and that's probably a really good place to be, just based on the growth in providers and how many actually deliver service in independent environments. So we surveyed our software customers at the end of June, and one of the things we asked them was, how likely would it be for you to outsource your billing in the next 1 to 2 years? And even though I knew this was a trend, I was quite surprised by the results. Almost a third said it was at least somewhat likely. And 1 out of 6 said very likely or likely. So this really speaks to why the market's expected to grow 20% a year over the next couple of years, because that trend towards looking for outside help to manage billing likely is actually accelerating. So let's talk about the survey we did. We did this in the latter part of June into July. Hopefully, again, many of you participated in this. We had 250 respondents, so that's definitely statistically significant. So this survey does represent your industry. 60% were Kareo users, 40% non-Kareo users, so that's probably a pretty good representation of our reach into the market as well. I'll go through the data, but you'll see it represents companies of all sizes, specialty focus, geographic focus, business models. It really does represent the industry well. And the sections that I'll walk through are really profiles around medical billing companies, business policy and operations, kind of the state of the industry in your words, technology, obviously critical to us. And we're working to formally publish this probably in October. And if you participated, you'll get a copy, but I know Nitin's going to ask, so I'll just say yes right now. We'll send out a copy to everyone that's here this year as well. And I think you'll find a lot of really useful information in here, and I'll touch on some of it today. So let's start first with the profiles. So one of the first questions we asked, and this was actually really interesting data came back, how many years have you been in business? And we knew it's a rapidly growing space, but 26% of medical billing companies are less than 2 years old. And that's pretty remarkable. I don't think you could pick too many industries where a quarter of the players have been in business for less than 2 years. On the other end of the spectrum, 40% of you have been in business for more than a decade. So there's obviously a lot of very well-established, long-standing, successful billing companies, with the rest kind of scattered between the two. And I think this really speaks to two things. One, obviously it is a big, fast-growing, interesting industry to build a business in. It's also really easy to become a medical billing company, quite frankly, right? You can start it up really quickly. Becoming good at it and actually surviving is a whole nother matter, but we see a lot of people kind of jumping into the game, and I think that's a really important consideration that we'll come back to. We then looked, and this ties to the previous slide, we looked at company size, and we looked at it in different ways, but for today I'll just talk about provider counts, and we broke all the billing companies really in just 3 simple buckets. So small, 1 to 25 providers, medium, 26 to 100, and then large, greater than 100. And think about where your company falls, because I'll present some of the data in those segments in a minute. 62% of medical billing companies are in the small category, which is interesting. 22% in medium and 16% in large. If you look at where the providers are actually served, though, out of the 62%, only 15% of providers are serviced by those billing companies. So there's a lot of small companies, but they don't have a lot of reach in terms of how many clients they serve. Medium companies serve about 28% of the market, and large companies, the 16% of companies that are large, serve 57% of the providers. So there's a lot of consolidation among the larger companies in this room in terms of where the business is. One of the obvious considerations as you build your business is your geographic coverage. So we asked, what is your market coverage within your business? And obviously this ties somewhat to the previous slide. So half of billing companies are focused locally, with about 22% regionally focused and the rest national. And if you look at the data in the bottom, this completely tracks with company size, not surprisingly. So a smaller billing company tends to be more locally based. As you grow, you expand your reach geographically, and eventually you get to a point where you establish your business in multiple regions, and the data really backs that up. The other key decision that you need to make as a billing company is what specialties are you going to focus on. And so we asked, are you highly focused, somewhat focused, or not at all focused? About half of billing companies say that they're highly focused on specific medical specialties, about a third somewhat focused, and the rest not focused. And this is interesting because the size data is a little bit different in that medium companies are actually, they report that they're more focused on specialties than small companies. And we'll dig into the data more when we publish the report, but my guess is that's probably a success factor. meaning if you're really focused on a specialty, you build out a lot of expertise, it helps you grow to the next level. And then when you get big enough, you don't have to be focused in that way necessarily any longer, because you can be good in a lot of different areas, and that's really represented in the 18% that are not focused. Okay? So let's go into some policies and operations. One of the things that we see a lot across our business is new practice startups. I think this speaks back to that previous issue of what's really happening in the independent space, and a lot of doctors can't stand working for a big hospital or system, and they want to go out on their own. That happens continuously. So we were curious about whether billing companies saw that as an opportunity, or is it just too hard to make money off of new practices? And we were a little surprised by the data. Half of companies reported that they frequently take on new practices as new customers. About 40% sometimes, and only 7% said no. So there's clearly a big opportunity here, but it's probably one of those areas that you really have to get right to not lose a whole lot of money partnering with a newer practice in their first year. And we dove into pricing a little bit and found some interesting data. On the left, the first question we asked is whether you charge startup fees for new clients. And this one was literally split right down the middle 3 ways. Yes, we do all the time, sometimes, and no. So, you know, across this room, everyone thinks about this issue a little bit differently, which was interesting. And then the next one we weren't really surprised by, but we asked, what's the basis for your fee model? And 75% of the companies said a percentage of collections, again, not surprising. Although there was a whole series of other smaller models, for example, just a flat monthly rate and others that you can see up there. But it seems like the standard is definitely percentage of collections. One of the hot topics, obviously, and Elizabeth, our keynote, will talk about this a little bit more later, is patient collections. So we asked the respondents what percentage of all of your customers' base is represented by patient collections, and you can see that on the left. The average was about 23%, so that's pretty substantial, and obviously that number is growing. And the follow-up question was, well, what do you charge to do patient collections? And as you can see, about 60%, just under 60% charge the same as insurance collections. Maybe the surprising data up here is the 23% that don't charge anything. And that's interesting because, as Elizabeth will show, there's a lot of data that suggests collecting from a patient is twice as hard, twice as expensive as collecting from an insurance company. So some billing companies are basically not charging for that. There may be a reason, for example, maybe their patient collection percentages are actually very low, or it's a competitive angle they're taking to win business, but that data point definitely jumped out at us. The other area we looked at, which I think is hugely critical as your businesses evolve, is what's the range of services that you offer to your customers. And we rank these just by the percentage of billing companies that offer the service. So the top 3 are really the universal ones: claims submission, follow-up, and appeals. And then typical services, obviously patient support, benefits verification, coding, working old AR. And then you start to think about what other ways could you add value to your practices. And you actually see a pretty high rate of these services being offered. So technology consulting, and we'll come back to that, chart audits, compliance consulting, contract negotiations, credentialing, and even marketing consulting. So it's really interesting to see what percentage of billing companies are starting to get into areas, either an extension of their billing business or completely in a new area like practice marketing. One of the hard things about the business you're in is making money, right? Because it's very costly to do what you do. And so we explored how are you building your back office? And the first question we asked is, do you work with third-party vendors in any of your production? For example, business process outsourcing. 35% of companies report that they do. And if you look at it from a size standpoint, over half of medium companies do. So it seems like as small companies get bigger, they reach a point where they need some outside help from a processing efficiency standpoint. And then when you get even bigger, you start to insource again, and that number actually falls down to 36%. And then one of the hot topics always is, you know, how you leverage, or do you leverage, offshore processing? And 21% of the companies reported that they do, but when you look at it from a company size standpoint, only 14% of the smaller companies do, 29% of medium, and 72% of large companies. So it looks like when you get to a certain scale, it's almost a standard to leverage offshore resources. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the state of the industry. This is a really interesting one. We asked everyone how much they expect to grow this year and next. First thing that jumps out at you is there's very few companies expecting to decline. I think it speaks to how well the industry is going right now. The average growth rate expected this year is 10%. So it'll be interesting to think about whether you're above or below that. The average next year is 12%, so the average company is expecting to grow a little bit faster. And almost half of companies expect to grow more than 10% in 2019. Not at the 20% that Frost is forecasting, but still any industry where half of the players are going to grow double digits is a pretty good industry. Similar question, we asked how the billing companies thought about the industry today and in 1 to 3 years. And basically, the majority over both time periods rated the industry as positive or very positive, and a relatively small percentage negative or very negative. And those don't seem to be changing despite some of the uncertainties that are coming down the line. As a follow-up, we asked the companies to rate the future opportunities that they see. And these are kind of the top 6. So the first one, which I spoke to a little bit, and so did Dan, is expanding services, so being able to add even more value to your clients. Number 2, just the trend towards outsourcing, kind of the rising tide raises all boats. Number 3, the ability to differentiate. Number 4, the economy. Number 5, interesting, the growth in the number of practices and clinics. And then the last one, a more stable regulatory environment. I think there's certainly some evidence that that's happening. The other thing I thought was interesting is 2 of the top 3 are really completely within your control. So it isn't just things happening in the marketplace. So thinking about your service line, thinking about how to differentiate and win more business as opportunities, that's really healthy. So on the flip side, we asked about risks. And the first one was not at all surprising. Obviously, consolidation is still happening. It's not happening at the rate it was a number of years ago. But if you have a big, important customer, no matter what your size is, and they get bought and you lose the business, that hurts, and that definitely still happens. While regulations was viewed as a positive, it was also viewed as a negative. Just goes to show how much uncertainty there is around the regulatory landscape. And then the third and fourth ones are really one and the same. So pressure on rates and more competition. Together, that's probably the number one risk. And that goes back to the fact that there's a lot more billing companies coming into the market every year. Clinics insourcing their billing, so the opposite trend happening. And then finally, the weak economy. Certainly the economy is in a pretty remarkable place right now, but that can't go on forever. Okay? One of the things we asked about, and Elizabeth will come back to this later, is how do you think new reimbursement models will impact your business over the next 1 to 3 years? And about a third said it's going to be negative, while 2/3 said it would be neutral or positive. So this was interesting. Medium companies were most concerned, not exactly sure why, but have the most fear around the implications for them. And then the larger companies were kind of neutral. Things change. We're probably thinking we're big enough to deal with it. We're ready. We're sophisticated to deal with the regulatory change. Okay, technology. We asked everyone, to what extent do you recommend an integrated EHR? Obviously a question near and dear to our hearts. 75% of companies said they do, and 25% say, no way, we stay away from technology, which was interesting. That seemed a little bit higher than I would have expected. There wasn't a big change based on company size, although medium companies were slightly more frequently recommending an integrated EHR. And then this was actually really interesting. So what percentage of your customers are actually using your recommendation? Half said less than a quarter. So I'm recommending a solution, but it's really hard to get the practice to use it for obvious reasons, given the very high adoption rate of EHRs over the last 6 or 7 years. 72% said less than 50%. And then 23% said almost everyone. When we dug into that data, for the most part, it was actually billing companies very focused on a single specialty, which kind of made sense because you have a really tight integrated model in which the EHR is an essential part. So that seemed to make sense to us. Another question we were really interested to learn a little bit more about: how many billing systems do you use? And I'd like it to be one, but 80% were 1 to 3. There's some crazy 6% of you that use 5 or more. I'm not really sure how you do that. Talk to us. We can definitely reduce the number of billing solutions you use. And then kind of the flip side of the HR question is, do you see opportunity to help with technology? 76% said yes, 16% maybe, and then 8% of you just want nothing to do with it. So interesting, probably still using paper or something, not sure. And there was no difference across company size, which was interesting as well, because I would expect as you get bigger, you probably have more confidence in being able to add value in this area, but the data didn't support that. And then the final question we asked around technology that I'm presenting today is, what do you see as the single biggest issue that your practices are facing? And not surprisingly, based on what I just presented, using an integrated EHR was the most mentioned response, closely followed by deploying a platform. So, basically deploying a solution that addresses clinical and billing and patient engagement and front office operations. Moving to the cloud, there's obviously still a lot of practices on installed desktop or server software. Mobile apps made the list, which was really interesting. I think there's a huge amount of potential there for, particularly for certain types of practices, and then there was a long list of other items. And large companies were most likely to report on using integrated EHR, and I suspect that's because they're really looking at efficiency in their operations, and obviously from a billing standpoint, if the EHR is integrated, it's a lot easier to do what you do. Okay. So that's kind of a snapshot of some of the data in there. So definitely when we send the report out, look for it. I think there's a lot more information that will be valuable to all of you as you think about your business and how to drive it forward. Let me kind of share my quick takeaways from the data. First of all, it's a great time to be a billing company. Again, there's not too many industries that you can be in where they're expected to grow more than 20% over the next couple of years. Billing's not getting any easier. Doctors need help. The trend is towards outsourcing. And if you think about it, who's a more trusted partner with them than you? And so as you think about what might be possible in terms of other services to deliver, you're really in the driver's seat to think about how you might expand your business and add value beyond just billing processing. Certainly the regulatory compliance evolution is on all of our minds. I think the reality of it, and Elizabeth will address this later, things happen pretty gradually. You need to stay ahead of it, but it isn't something that's going to happen overnight and disrupt your business in a negative way if you're proactive. On the flip side of it being a great time to be a billing company, there's no question competition's increasing. So when Nitin spoke about our base of billing companies, certainly some percentage of our growth is from new billing companies getting into the market. I'm sure you're seeing that today. And a big part of really this summit is to, I think, help you ask and answer some key questions about the future of your business. So some of the data highlighted things that you need to think about in your growth strategy today and as you move forward. What's your geographic strategy? What's your specialty focus? Should that change? How should that change over time? What services should I offer? We didn't go into a lot of detail, but what's my operational model, right? How do I drive a lot of efficiency? At the end of the day, if you can do high quality medical billing for less money than the next person, that's probably going to be a key reason you win and retain business. And then what's your pricing strategy? There's certainly some interesting data in there. The other thing that's super important is really what's unique about your business, what's your unique value proposition. And something we talk about in our business, I'm sure you do as well, if the very perfect customer came in as a prospect, are you going to be able to recognize that they're really the ideal customer for your business? Probably most of you would say yes. And then the second question, though, is why are they going to select you, right? Because everyone else is answering that same question. What is really unique about your billing company that they're going to select you, stay with you, and be happy with you? And in a market where there's probably 2,000 competitors, if you can't answer that question, you're certainly not going to be one of the companies that makes it to the large size, to this top 16%. So the final thing I want to leave you with is the same message that Nitin shared and Dan shared. We're absolutely dedicated to helping you achieve your goals. I hope you see that and feel that and walk away from the event knowing that. I would say the one thing I would encourage you to do, there are a lot of black shirts here for a reason. And what we hear in the last 2 years, one of the best parts of this event is the one-on-one interactions. So definitely reach out to a Kareo team member. If you have ideas on how we can help you, we'll take all of them seriously. And we love to get those back. That's absolutely what we want to do. So please do that, and we look forward to partnering with you and taking advantage of this awesome opportunity. Thank you.